unusual time for us to be live streaming.
Yeah.
It is,
Uh,
for those of you who are listening on the podcast later, we normally record like afternoon, evening, Eastern time at least.
yeah.
Today, we're up bright and early at 9:15, and for Rob, it is 6:15 on Los Angeles time.
Yeah, on the West Coast. So anybody watching the live feed of this right now on the West Coast, what are you doing? Why are you up so early?
I have some guesses about why they're up so early, and most of them have to do with the demise of our society.
Oh, so we're just getting right into it, I guess. This is our first topic here for today. Seems unavoidable under the circumstances is the odd situation around our presidential election, or the elections in general and the presidential specifically.
I feel the need to say, I've said this from time to time, but if this is, say, your first stream or your first podcast, you may be confused because, like, the name on our podcast is Sweet Tea Shakespeare, which is a theater company, Shakespeare, classic theater, and here we are very frequently talking about politics. But the way I make sense of this is that's what artists do, and that's what artists were doing then. That's what artists are doing now.
Yeah, the conception for this particular show, the After Hours podcast, is this would be what you would hear a group of people talking about after going out to the theater. Let's say that you've gone to see a play or you've been in one, and in happier times, gone to a restaurant afterwards and sitting around the table discussing it and the world and ideas. And we usually get around to Shakespeare in some capacity or another before it's all done. But this is about art and culture and the world in general. This is our After Hours podcast discussion. And today, that's what we're talking about for a little bit.
So tell me what you think. Tell me
Uh,
what's going through your head.
well, I'm kind of, we've talked about this before, which is that throughout this election, I really felt like been of two minds that either I am sort of overreacting to the situation because of my anxiety and fears and irritations and um, anger, or I'm really underreacting to a situation that's much worse than I can even comprehend. I kind of switch between those two poles right now, and I'm mostly, frankly, on the side of thinking at the moment that things are probably going to work out fine before it's all done. Fine to the extent that right now we're in this sort of horrible conflict situation in which everybody hates each other, and that's not necessarily going to go away anytime soon. And we're staring down the barrel of a constitutional crisis here, which is also very troubling. Um, but in the end, I think that I think that there's really no way that this gets to that point. Well, not no way. I think it's unlikely. And at the end of the day, there'll be a relatively orderly transition preceded by a fairly traumatic, uh, blow up of some sort on Donald Trump's part, in which he angrily, says something to the effect of, well, this was all stolen from me, but you bastards can do whatever you want. I'm taking my ball and going home, which is going to feel real unpleasant whenever that happens. But I
Yeah.
just don't see a way for something else to happen.
Well, I hope that is the case. I continue to read the situation like a Shakespearean tragedy, and it is not a question for me about who is going to sort of suffer the downfall. I think there's a list of people. If for me is a question of how many other people go with that, whether it is tightly focused on the central characters, or if it is there's a lot of collateral damage, and that's what I'm sort of looking out for. I think I lean towards you, but the alarm bells definitely go off as the norms continue to be disrupted. I'm not particularly worried about the electoral college votes. I'm not particularly worried about how the states are going to go. It's not that. It is the damage done in between now and then, say by all of these replacements that are happening at the Defense Department, and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's where, and I'll just be frank. Like, I'm scrolling through my Facebook over the last week since the election was called on Saturday, and I see people who operate in the bubble, in the parlor.
Which bubble?
That bubble. The parlor bubble, the QAnon bubble, the right-wing media, which I don't actually think in this case includes Fox News too much, because I think they're on board for the story I hear from them is relatively traditional, at least from their news people. Now, their commentators, that's a different story, right? But that's where I'm like, I'm looking at that sideways, about particularly about the Defense Department, the stuff that's happening with the General Services Administration. I just think that's theatrics. And speaking of theatrics, I mean, where I do take some assurance is in thinking through what the actual motivations are. So I think there are three. I think there's personal vengeance on behalf of some of the Trump crowd, including Trump himself, which is sort of issuing as many fuck yous as possible on his way out. I think that's definitely one of them. Two is the Georgia runoff Senate races, which I think have handcuffed a lot of Senate Republicans and a lot of other people as they try to hang on to that majority. First of all, I think they're going to hang on to the majority. I don't think the Democrats are going to get to 50 seats, even if they try really hard. I think it'd be close, but I don't think they're going to do it. And so I think that's part of it. And the third leg of this stool for me is fundraising. We know about Trump's personal finances, and we also know about the needs of these Georgia Senate races, as an example. And so I think they're going to stretch as far as they can into December to raise as much money as they can to pay bills. And that's what I think. That if there's good news, that's not good news, but if there is an underlying sort of bedrock that is not constitutional crisis, it's that stuff for me.
Yeah, to that point, it's a funny thing. I was just reading this morning that Reuters has a story out that sort of discovered after reading all of the fine print on the donation solicitations that they're making to, fight the fraud from the Trump campaign, that all donations that get made for less than $8,000 go into a slush fund that essentially is just going to pay off campaign debts. Like, none of that money is going to fight the fraud, quote unquote, and only payments over $8,000 are going to that. And that, I think, even among those, 60% of those of over $8,000 are going to the campaign. So, it's there's that, which is interesting. So I do think that is obviously a part of this. I also think that, there's a degree to which I think Donald Trump sort of operates in this zone of, well, let's just see what happens, right? And that, on some level, he and the people who are running his campaign with him are aware of the fact that they face an uphill climb, but you never know, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, let's just throw a bunch of stuff up against the wall and see if something sticks. And maybe everything breaks our way, which is a gamble that the president has made before, and it's worked out for him. And it's possible that it might work out here, but I don't think it will. It's a funny thing if you look at the substance of the specific court challenges that they've made so far. First of all, not one of them alleges actual fraud, which is interesting given the rhetoric, coming out of the campaign and President Trump in particular, and Rudy Giuliani, who's spearheading the legal efforts here, and also everything that's being echoed in conservative media. They talk about fraud. In fact, none of the legal challenges allege fraud at all. And explicitly, in a few cases, when asked, like the lawyers have said, no, we are not alleging fraud. These are all procedural issues that they're bringing up, saying that the way that certain things were handled were, created a disadvantage for the Trump campaign, which means that they should, the election should be nullified, or in the case of Pennsylvania, they're trying to just throw out the election. That's what the remedy they're asking for. They're saying the entire election should be scrapped and Pennsylvania should just not count. Or a couple of other things. It's hard to keep track of everything they're asking for, but or maybe that's Michigan. I may be getting those confused, but in one case, that's something that they're asking for. And in all of these, and it, like, the worst things that they're saying is like people were unpleasant, but they're not alleging fraud. Do you know what I mean? Like in Detroit, there's this whole thing about how they believe at one of the thousands of places where votes are tabulated, people were especially unpleasant at this one place in Detroit to the monitors. And from all the analysis that I've read on both the left and the right, they don't think that there's much chance of these things going through. The only way that I see, Trump remaining president at the end of this is if he's able, through sort of media influence, to get enough of his people angry enough that they will bring pressure to bear on the states that are controlled by Republican legislatures to vacate the election results and impanel a whole new set of electors who will go and vote for Trump in contrary to what the vote totals are. I think there's an outside possibility of that. I certainly don't think that that's something that Trump himself and his people would be unhappy with. I think that that's something that they are, working towards as a possible goal. But there are a lot of reasons why I just think that probably won't happen. And if it did, man, we would be in a real situation. And we've discussed on here the possibility of sort of Armageddon as, whether or not that's something that's happening right now. I think in America, that would definitely draw us closer to that. There's a Vice News story from a while earlier this year, where one of the guys, I can't remember the journalist's name, but he said he's got this creeping feeling of worry that we are moving towards what he a long time ago came to think of as the cool zone in history, not just American history, but world history, which he defines as historical periods in which students think, wow, that's really cool, when they're reading about what happened. Then moments when that are interesting and super cool to read about in history, but that those moments in history were always sort of miserable and horrendous and terrible for the people living through them. And we're not quite there yet, but we could get there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, we'll stay vigilant, I suppose.
yeah,
that's all we can do at this point. All right. Well, we check in on politics every now and again, and we will continue to do so. Every 5 minutes, there's news. So
but one other thing on this, I mean, to the question that we started out with here, reading through Facebook feeds or Twitter is a thing for me, like just doom scrolling through that. I think that's not a helpful way to process this stuff. The people who are super engaged in this, like in your Facebook feed, for instance, and you have a much more sort of broadly diverse Facebook friend network than I do. If you're seeing a lot of the angry sort of, QAnon whatnot response to this. So I guess kudos to you for that. Or on Twitter, it's the people who are engaged in this stuff are really engaged in it and angry, and the whole point of it is, from Trump's perspective, is to keep people really agitated. Like, that's part of the plan. But there aren't actually that many people on Twitter, and there aren't even that many people as a percentage of population or voters on Facebook. And that's not the real world in its way. It's influential. It certainly has an effect, but I think it's not the best way to process this stuff.
I agree with you, and I will say, so I wouldn't say my my Facebook community is widely diverse. I will say that as it happens, the news that I've gotten that is sort of neither of these individuals, it is my belief, assume Donald Trump won the election, but both of them cast doubt on the process, right? And they're essentially repeating talking points from some spot in the media that I'm not as familiar with, right? I don't read the It's Newsmax, it's whatever,
right?
And I don't have a handle on that. What tells me everything I need to know is that both of the individuals in question are conservative evangelical Christians, and their primary content in terms of output, like thinking of them, their Facebook page is a brand for just a second, right?
Sure.
Their primary content, their primary output, primary performance is about Jesus, church, faith. And during this election season, and particularly in the last 3 weeks or so, and over the last week, it's a mix of Jesus and this doubt about the election series. And there's a whole essay that I could write about that shit. But it's and it's about like the willingness to believe unbelievable things, and the propensity of a group of people to sort of hang on to that kind of stuff when you have a Messiah figure presenting himself, and in fact a sort of church and media structure, and I'm talking about like Trump church media structure built under propping up that figure on symbolic terms, not just on sort of personal or political terms. It's tough, and I speak about this as a person who's come from a conservative evangelical background. It's unreal to me, the sort of self-sabotage that these individuals, and I get that they don't represent the whole group, but I find it a neat coincidence, right?
Sure.
and it just baffles me. That's the best I can say. Like,
wow, that sounds like a whole other topic. We should maybe pursue it another time. But I guess let's put this to bed, right?
all right.
Presidential election. Yikes. Let's see what happens.
All right, we're moving on to things that are less apocalyptic, I think.
Yeah, sure. So as we discussed in our last episode, we are taking this month of November to focus in on trying to complete a play that Jeremy and I have been kicking around for a while, called Falstaff's Son. Anyway, we've done some writing on that. So we're going to share what we've got here. Jeremy, you want to talk about what we got?
Yeah,
today?
so this is a scene early in the play. Currently it's like our second scene, and it picks up on some action between Bardolph, famous character in these Henry plays that we're looking at, and Boy, who's our main character, I suppose you would say, is Falstaff's son. At this point, doesn't know that that's the case, and Bardolph and Boy are kind of on the way back to the inn, and sort of taking up some informal training. So Boy is in training generally to be a page for a night, and so this conversation picks up right there.
Yeah. So in this scene, which we're going to read and then talk about a little bit, I will be saying the role of Bardolph. Trying to decide if I want to do this with a dialect or not, how embarrassing that'll be for myself, but it might help, is the thing.
And I'm going to read for Boy.
Yeah, all right. We'll see if we do this. Find a voice that I like for this character. Right. Take no shit, child. Even from those so-called royals and the men. Highborn and no knight, a gentleman, peerage, a steerage. You hear me?
Quite, Lord Bardolph. Begging your pardon, Lord Bardolph.
Now, mind yourself, child. I'll be having no mockery today. No sneering and jeering, no piddle or paddle.
Just practicing, good sir.
Practicing. Aye. Good. Very good. Take no shit. Princes are men, like other men are. Mortal. They have mothers and fathers, just like we mere mortals, yeah?
Yes, sir, but, fair sir, I have heard in my training, sir, and in the pulpits, that this is not the wisest approach. Princes may become kings, and...
Do not kings die, child?
Yes, my lord.
And do not men die, boy?
Of course, sir.
And so, kings are men, fathers to nations for a time, if nations they be.
And if the king is a father to the nation, and the prince may be a king yet...
Boy, whose face is on the coin, lad?
The king's, sir.
Nay, child, the face of a man you've agreed to call king. And who is on the coin before this coin? A face of a different man, others agreed to call king. And who will be on the coin after this coin? The face of a different man.
Yes, sir. I understand, sir.
Perhaps, my youth. And what are the coins pressed by this Henry, that to be? Percy or Plantagenet? Ned Black or Ned Red?
I don't understand, sir.
Gold, a silver, tin, a copper. A coin's a coin, my lad. Worth what it is in its weight in the world. The king dies. They collect the old ones, melt them down, make new ones, like the metal of worn swords, my lad.
Its weight in the world?
The face is temporary, my child. The meaning, and I say, is the material they won't teach that in the pulpit. Is the material. They won't teach that in the pulpits or in your page trainings. And so, my lad, look up. Look up and look through. You'll see the prince here shortly.
Are we headed to the inn?
To deliver this letter from Sir John, yes. And we're taking the long way there, lad. But yes, on purpose. Now, what do you do when you see the prince and Poins and their lot?
Take no shit, sir.
Ah, and you're taking the coin, young sir. You take it, you hold it. Feel the impression of it. Roll it around in your fingers. Remember whose face is on it. But you do not, and I repeat this for your betterment, do not make wager with it.
I hadn't planned to do...
You're not hearing me, child. You do not make wager with it. Its meaning will melt. There is no future but the one in your pocket. You hear me?
I do.
Good. Now, here's the thing. You are to take no shit, but there are some of us, how shall I say, too invested to avoid the shit. We, my older lot, though it pains me to say it, well, there's some shit that must be taken. But you take no shit.
So, sir, I am not to follow your example.
You are to follow my example, child, but you are not to invest in it. You witnessed the shit and the beatings and the blastings of one Sir John Falstaff. You'll see another volume of it when you next see the Prince and Poins. They will give you shit, but do not take it. Take the coin and no more. But for me, well, shit's good for the crops, and I'm nothing if not a fertile field.
And bodies too, sir?
What's that?
A body, sir, when it decays, it feeds the fertile field, like a king's body, sir, or a knight's.
And the fatter the body, the more fertile the field. Clever, yes.
And the king is a father to the nation, even for those of us without fathers.
We all have fathers, fertile enough, lad. And the secret, if I may say so, is to find fathers wherever you can. And you'll never be without one. There we are.
Hooray.
So let's discuss this a little bit.
Sure.
And again, apologies for the accent work at 6:15 in the morning. That was all cold. So we'll see if any of that holds up on re-listen. So the situation that we have here is the boy has been brought to Falstaff, gifted to him by Henry. Under, the public story is that this is a page that's for him. What we've hinted at in the previous scene and is known by Bardolph in this scene without it being said is that the boy is in fact Falstaff's son, who Henry, shortly after his birth, or after the boy's birth, and at Falstaff's request, put in with a noble family to be raised as a distant relative to help elevate his station. And now, after about 7 years of being raised by them, he's being returned to Falstaff to act as his page. And when in fact Falstaff knows, and some few people around him in his orbit know, he's actually raising his son at this point. But, elevated from where he would have been, because one of the things that also will be intimated in a scene that we're working on currently is that Falstaff's mother is not Falstaff's mother, the boy's mother is one of Falstaff's frequent consorts, Doll Tearsheet, a prostitute who frequents the Boar's Head. And rather than being the son of a prostitute, the kid's been given a little bit of a shine and has somewhat noble background thrust upon him, which is not entirely untrue anyway. He, Falstaff, strictly speaking, is a knight. And being his son might not be bad, but being the, son of being the bastard son of a a prostitute is not, you know, great for that kid's prospects. So this is the secret that everyone's sort of tiptoeing around a little bit. And the boy himself does not know.
Mm.
But Bardolph does. So, Jeremy, talk a little bit about what you're thinking, because you took the first pass here of this scene here, which is what we've just read. What's your thinking here? What is Bardolph trying to accomplish in this scene?
Well, I think that the primary thing here that we talked about is that we're trying to put the boy in a place where he is hedging his bets. I mean, I think we might have actually used that phrase, so that Bardolph is a kind of fool, but also very savvy, and we see that in some of the other plays. And so we're just sort of taking this opportunity, showing Bardolph in this sort of paternal role where he is encouraging the boy to sort of hedge his bets, specifically with regard to Hal, right? Hal, at this point in the story, has a reputation for running loose. I think that's fair to say. Intemperance, all of that. And so we see Bardolph encouraging the boy to kind of keep his alarm bells up regarding that. And I think what we'll see elsewhere in this story is that he gets it from the other direction too, right? He's going to be told to hedge his bets with regard to Falstaff and his advice. And so anyway, that was the goal anyway, is to sort of keep this, to position the boy in a place where he can, still be literally loyal to the king, say, or the prince, but is sensitive to what's really going on and the politics and the way the world works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see in this a real concern on Bardolph's part for the boy and the tricky position that he unknowingly occupies here. And Bardolph in this scene is really having to be careful because there are things he can't say to him.
Mm.
It would be much simpler if he could say, "Listen, you're in an awkward position here, by virtue of the fact that your father is who he is, and he has the relationship with the king that he has, and that you are not who you think you are, and you're going to have to navigate between these two worlds in a way that is more complicated than it is for me, who as he says, just has to take the shit." But the sort of veneer of respectability that the boy has, even though he doesn't deserve it, it brings with it its own strange dangers, that I think Bardolph is trying to prepare him to deal with without actually explicitly talking about what the issues are. So it's a fun scene, I think, in that way. And the idea of trying to explain to him, it's like, recognize that the king is the king and the prince is the prince, but also know that they're just men, is, I think, advice that will serve him well and will probably come back into play at a later point in the story.
Yeah, and part of what I was trying to get after. So we've tried to loosely, I think, situate some of the story we're telling in between and among some actions in the source plays, right? And one of the things that I'm noticing at this part of the story is that the boy presents as sort of precocious and is a collector of information, is a student, has a lot of or a number of he's read, is I guess what I'm trying to say. He is a collector of information. He's got some natural intelligence and likes showing it off.
Well, and he has some education as well.
Yeah.
And it's that combination of naivete and also, native intelligence and some education as well that I think characterizes him.
Yeah. So we're trying to get at that too. I think. And
Yeah.
and ultimately, I mean, I think what we're going to have to demonstrate is that the boy is capable of being Falstaff's son, if you know what I mean, has that same acumen built into the DNA.
Well, our intention. He's a smart kid, and I think that comes from Falstaff, who is smart, but also has a lot of defects as well. We'll see if the boy can maybe avoid some of those or not. We'll see what happens. So we'll continue to check in on this as we keep writing, which I suspect will probably, progress through past the month of November, but this has given us a good push. So we'll keep working.
For sure.
And we'll leave it there and continue to our final segment of this episode in our continuing series, ranking sandwiches from fast food places. Today we are going to be talking about a sandwich in our Italian subcategory, and that would be Jimmy John's Italian.
Jimmy John.
So I will let Jeremy kick that off, and we'll get going here.
Okay, here I go. Overall taste, 3. Mouthfeel, 2. Adjoining produce, 1. Bread, 2. Meat, 1. Adjoining sauces and condiments, 2. Sandwich aesthetic, 0. Complementary items, 1. Contextual sleaze, 1. Appraisal of the cost, 2. Personalities nigh unto the sandwich, -2. Nature of the sandwiches lingering in the memory, -3, for a rock bottom total of 9 points. Out of 50. This may be the most depressing entry for our sandwich reviews I'll ever contemplate, and given that we've already reviewed Arby's, that's saying something. Funny story first. I was once cast as Fezziwig in a reading of A Christmas Carol at a theater in Liberty, Missouri, where Jimmy John's mother-in-law, whose name now escapes me, was the director. I don't remember everything about it, but I guess old JJ fell in love with this woman's daughter, and after some sort of mysterious courtship, they sent a plane to pick up the family for the wedding or something. That's a true story. So I have mixed feelings about Jimmy John's. When I did summer Shakespeare after my first full year of teaching, I worked in the small downtown of Grand Haven, Michigan. Though something of a tourist destination in the summer because of the U.S. Coast Guard Festival, the town itself is pretty small and does not invite too many national chains. At the time, just out of grad school, Jimmy John's was a welcome emblem of civilization. I found myself drawn to the relatively weird combination of turkey and roast beef on their menu, and I survived the summer. But let's face it, Jimmy John's, and perhaps all national chains with John in the name, face their fair share of trouble these days. Jimmy John appears to be a corporate sellout who takes his fortune to shoot wild animals in countries that don't belong to him, either the animals or the countries. Papa John appears to be the worst possible kind of human being imaginable, and Long John Silver has never quite gotten over the plundering rap. There's something sort of gross about supporting these kinds of businesses, and I say that as a person who thinks trophy hunting is, apolitically speaking, rather a cruel way to spend extra money. Fast cars and vacation homes I could totally get. And so walking into the Jimmy John's on Ramsey Street in Fayetteville was a trip I've looked to avoid over the last couple of years especially. This Jimmy John's experience was entirely underwhelming. Despite a couple friendly staff members, the atmosphere was cold. Literally, the thermostat set at 70 degrees on a warm North Carolina day, and full of the semi-inspirational, semi-humorous metal signage that only folks who wear polos and have a slight paunch and tan lines around their eyeballs think are funny. Jimmy John's is a man's restaurant in this regard. Slabs of meat on a long, slender bun. Phalluses that will get you in and out fast.
Good Lord.
No frills. Pick your meat, pick your crunch, do some Coke, all with the illusion of choice. For these reviews, we landed on the Italian, a sandwich comprised of thinly sliced deli meats and their flavorless, what I think is provolone. Together, the meats and cheeses comprise a texture I can only describe as what it must be like to bite into a partially dehydrated Jell-O or a very thick meat-flavored fruit roll-up. A mass of objects that together are indistinguishable from each other. A moderately salty, wet thing. And it is this thing that, even if palatable in its own right, reveals the fatal flaw in Jimmy John's sandwich construction. It's literally always the case that the JJ sandwich gets its flavor from the onion and mayo or whatever on the sandwich and not necessarily the meat, although I'd argue that the turkey tastes a bit like turkey. And these very wet ingredients, mayo, wet onion, wet tomato, slippery lettuce, work with the meat and cheese slab to create far too much lubrication to keep the sandwich contents intact while eating. Jimmy John's circumcises the bread only on one side, and if you happen to hold it with one hand from the uncut side, you've already lost. I was, in part, anticipating all this when I ordered from a very friendly young man at the register. I grabbed my salt and vinegar chips, went to fill my cup with Diet Coke, and turned back to the end of the sandwich line. My sandwich, gosh darn it, was not there. It was not fast. It was not freaky. It was like a lover who has taken far too long to accomplish their task. I was bored. What was I to do? Unexpectedly, I found myself depositing my drink and chips and keys on the table of a booth about 4 steps away. Surely that would be enough time to be sort of fast and a little freaky. Wrong. I sat down and listened to the husbands and wives chatter around me. Still nothing. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the folks on the line finish a sandwich, and I started for the line, but it was not mine. It was for the drive-thru, the black hole of the fast food industry where the important metrics are speed and speed. I was second fiddle. About a minute later, the manager, a middle-aged man endowed with a mustache and headset, called me from 4 steps away by saying, "Big-ass sandwich," and then, slamming is probably too strong a word, plopping my sandwich on the ledge near him. "Come and get it," he seemed to suggest. I was 4 steps away, comfortable and embedded in my booth. Was he really going to make me come and get the sandwich? Yes. So I did. And the sandwich was everything I expected. The strangely crusty bread, the lopsided experience, the bland flavor, and the one-handed girth. Ho-hum.
Holy cow. So bad. We are really in a different place on this one. I'm excited to talk about it. All right. My take. Flavor, 8. Mouthfeel, 4. Adjoining produce, 0. Bread, 3. Meat, 4.5. Adjoining sauces and condiments, 2. A sandwich aesthetic, 4. Complementary items, 1.5. Contextual sleaze, 2. Appraisal of the cost, 4. Personalities nigh into the sandwich, 0. Nature of the sandwich is lingering in memory, 2. For 35.5 points. We could not have a bigger spread. I don't think we've had one since we've begun. Let's talk about it. I will jump into my review here. So, first place I lived in college after being in a dorm my freshman year was an isolated house directly across the street from the football stadium. Place was in bad shape, had a real Animal House vibe to it with an assortment of mismatched salvaged furniture, enormous projection screen television, and a general atmosphere of crumbling squalor. But the location was good. And one of the things I liked about it was that it was just down the road within very close walking distance from a Jimmy John sandwich shop. It was essentially a shack with a walk-up and drive-through window, and it was a chain that I was completely unfamiliar with before I encountered it as a university student. As we have established previously, if you have an Italian sub on your menu, I will order it. And I did, from Jimmy John's. And man, I liked it. And from then on, I would periodically take a walk down the street to the shack to get myself a sub. Even now, every once in a while, I will get one of these sandwiches. So let it be known right from the drop, I am kind of in the tank for this franchise. But for the purposes of this competition, each particular sandwich must be judged on its own merits, regardless of whatever feelings we bring to the both literal and metaphoric table. So, despite my warm feelings for Master John and his sandwich dispensary, things very much could have gone badly for them. And in fact, they almost did. Let me explain. My sandwich experience got off to a poor start. This is the first review I have written in the age of COVID. And the Pasadena Jimmy John's is an area where parking has been made scarce since local restaurants have moved tables into the streets where they used to be parking to create outdoor dining spaces. This meant that it took me an eternity to actually get inside and get my food, even though I used the very convenient Jimmy John's website to make my order and customize my sandwich. The Italian nightclub, consisting of salami, capicola, ham, and provolone, onion, lettuce, tomato, mayo, oil, and vinegar, oregano, and basil, except hold the lettuce and tomatoes. Also a bag of Jimmy John's salt and vinegar chips and a large Sprite. This is not the fault of Jimmy John's, but it made me especially negatively disposed for certain events that followed. The decor and aesthetic of the restaurant, which we could normally evaluate under our contextual sleaze category, would be nice and inviting under normal circumstances, with appealing red brick and mortar and an unfussy presentation that makes you feel like you're in a good old sub shop, Jersey Mike's. You should take note. At the moment, however, chairs are on top of tables and seating areas are taped off in order to make it clear that indoor dining is not allowed, which is fine, not to be held against anybody. The lady helping me was friendly. She brought me my order, and I returned to my inconveniently distantly parked car and returned home. Upon arriving at home and unwrapping my sub, which I thought looked nice, I encountered two unpleasant facts. Despite my clear specifications, as said on the website, the people who made the sandwich did not hold the lettuce and tomatoes. Now listen, this comes down to a personal taste thing. I like salads. I'm not opposed to vegetables, but as a rule, I do not like sliced tomatoes on a sandwich. And in general, I am not fond of lettuce on them either, except in cases involving certain high-quality green leaf lettuces. And this was definitely not that. In addition to the row of tomatoes along the bottom part of the bread, the top and the bottom of the sandwich was covered in a thick layer of shredded iceberg lettuce mixed with mayonnaise. So I scooped them off, creating a little poker chip stack of tomatoes next to a couple of wet lettuce haystacks. I mean, it was a lot of lettuce. My second unpleasant discovery came when I bit into the sandwich and found that the bread on the end of it was soggy with oil and vinegar. Gross. It was a gross bite. I don't know if it was because the sandwich, I don't know if it was because it took so long for me to bite into it after it was done being made due to the parking issues, but I don't think so. Sandwich like that should be able to keep without getting wet. The people who made the thing did a bad job. They couldn't follow directions, and they went overboard with the O and V. I was already in a bad mood about things for the reasons I have listed, and this did not help. But folks, after that first bite, sandwich equilibrium asserted itself, and I was won over again by the qualities that struck me all those years ago. The meat was flavorful and in good proportion to the mayo and onions, which accompanied the meat well, and the bread was great. This is where I really go in for Jimmy John's. I like the bread. It's soft with a nice smooth crust and just enough body and chew to stand up to the toppings, with the exception of my ghastly wet first bite. By the time I got to the other end of the sandwich, my unpleasant feelings had been erased. The kettle-style chips and soda were fine accompaniments. I enjoyed it. So while it was a close shave, Jimmy John's, you managed to pull it out for me in the end. Good job. Wow, we feel very differently about our sandwich experiences here.
We do. I have been back to a Jimmy John's one time since I wrote this review.
Which, just to be clear, to give you a little behind the curtain thing, this was one of the last reviews that we did when we wrote these up for a website a while back. And this one actually never got published. You finished your review. I never got to mine. And so there's a gulf of years between your review and mine, which I literally just finished yesterday. So anyway, continue.
Yeah. Well, there's one like right near my house. I pass it every day. It's in between the gym and the Starbucks. Like I wish I could say I was tempted to go visit. Now, one of the reasons I'm not tempted to go visit has nothing to do with that particular experience. And I'm going to go back to something we talked about reason I'm not, it's a little creepy because the animal thing, but like, let's say I could get over that. And I'm pretty good about dissociating from like feeling things for people, period. I can do that. I can like not care. I can turn on the sociopath a little bit now and again. And I could see myself going back. And the one time I tried to go back, I was like, hey, I was on keto at the time. And I'm like, I can't do the bread thing, but the meat's in the mayo. I can make that work. I wonder if they take one of their giant pickles, slice it in half, and let me put the sandwich contents on the pickle.
Huh.
And they didn't. And so I just left. I was like, no big deal. But I sort of get agitated at these things. So I hopped onto the Twitter and I tweeted Jimmy John's to say, hey, you all should think about this. And the response I got was like the response you would expect from people who kill animals all the time. It was not polite. And I was like, horrible. Well, I'm done. You know, I'm like, I could do it myself. I could order the pickle. I could order the sandwich. I could do it myself. But it's like, come on, folks. Like, your whole thing is about customizability, as many of these restaurants that we've talked about are. That's the new vogue, is like giving customers choice. And here is a choice we can't make. Now, I don't know if their health department thing's sewn up in that or whatever. I don't know. But here's the other thing. And it goes back to the fast and freaky, or lack thereof. In this country, over the last few years, we've had a debate about $15 an hour fast food service workers, right? It's been centered around McDonald's, but it certainly applies to all these other places. And what I'm here to say to you is that you cannot have fast and freaky if you're not paying people for people's time. And I mean specifically, making sandwiches is a kind of skilled labor. You could argue that it's low skill. It's like probably a rung or two up from low skill for me. And you can't have fast and freaky, and you can't have good customer service unless you're paying for it. And an example of a restaurant that we will look at that does that is like Chick-fil-A. They pay for their labor, and you see the effects of that payment out there. But at these lower end places, like a Jimmy John's, like a McDonald's, like a Burger King, you are getting what the wages are paying for.
Well, yeah, you're getting what you pay for.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's funny. I had forgotten until after I had written sort of my thing and then reread yours about the whole animal thing. That was just not something that was ever on my radar. And I honestly don't know to what extent that would have colored my thinking on this. I think it's funny that we both have these sort of earlier associations with this restaurant that sort of have shaped our opinions of it in some way, which I think is funny. Mine obviously more benign and pleasant than yours. You have a weird backstory with this restaurant. I don't know. I mean, sort of all of that aside, I like the sandwich. Yeah, and the fact that you had an unpleasant Twitter interaction with them, that's so bad. Like, who is running their social media? That's horrible. But I do like the sandwich, and I do like their bread. I know that you don't, from in your review, don't think much of it, but I actually do think that's key to what kind of makes make their sandwiches work to the extent that they do. The meat, I mean, truth be told, I don't know that there's a huge distinction between different kinds of, meats at these different sub places that we've talked about now, Subway, Jimmy John's, and Jersey Mike's. They all basically taste the same, right? It's like, these are all fine. But the bread is really the big distinguishing factor. And of those three places, I really like the bread here.
Well, I would say, so I like the bread too, actually. But I think the reason in our points total, if I'm remembering right, the reason I suggested putting in sandwich architecture is specifically because of the Jimmy John's experience. And look, Jimmy John's, if you're listening, there's a real quick way to improve what you're doing, because you talk about wet ingredients. When you have those wet ingredients and they're lubricated with mayonnaise and oil, all right, they put them on the outside. What happens when you squeeze the sandwich is that the contents squeeze out of it, right? They squeeze out. They cut the bread along the side. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And if you are attentive enough and practiced enough at eating a Jimmy John's sandwich, you keep it tightly wrapped with paper as you chew into it, and you tear the paper away, and that's what sort of saves that. But the sandwich itself is not built. It's just too wet. The ingredients are too wet, and so it squeezes out all the contents, and it makes a whole mess. And the other thing I would say, specifically about tomatoes and lettuce in this case, is that I'm sort of a tomato geek. Not a real hard one, but like I pay attention to tomato flavor at the grocery store and at fast food, and there's been a lot of work over the last decade, 15 years, about tomato crops and how they've become more and more flavorless as demand has gone up, and as there's like a year-round growing cycle, and people in Florida and Georgia and Texas are growing tomatoes all the time, and over time the flavor of those tomatoes goes away. So Jimmy John's has an ingredient problem here with their tomatoes specifically. That's a little bit like what you were describing on the lettuce side. I mean, the iceberg lettuce has no flavor; it's just filler, right? Their tomatoes, the tomatoes in this case, aren't good either.
It's interesting. I wonder if part of the reason that I generally am more positively inclined towards the sandwich is that I usually don't get lettuce and tomatoes on it. Like that it seems to me that probably massively sort of cuts down on the problem that you're talking about here, and that's just not generally a part of my experience. It was irritating that they got it wrong on this. I mean, they really screwed it up in terms of the including those things, and it isn't pleasant. I don't understand. It's like just these giant thatch of iceberg lettuce strings. It's like, who is this for? Who likes this? And whatever, taking the tomatoes off. So I wasn't happy about that. And man, that soggy bite was gross. And you should not be saturating a sandwich with that much oil and vinegar that's even possible after it's sat for a little while. And weirdly, the rest of the sandwich didn't do that. So, I had a pleasant experience interacting with the people at the place, but they obviously didn't do a good job making the sandwich. So maybe that speaks to, again, the issue you were talking about with wages and whatnot. Though I think in California, the situation's maybe a little better. I don't know. Anyway, boo for all the things you're talking about, but I still liked it. I don't know what to tell you.
You're allowed. I will not judge you for liking a sandwich I did not like.
It is interesting because this is going to make our ranking on this. Like, I think we could be coming back to it, is what I'm saying. It's not impossible that another trip to Jimmy John's lies in our future, because this could take its particular bracket. But we'll see, I guess, as we keep going.
All right, sir. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to everybody who joined us on the live stream. As always, you can contact us if you want us to say something specifically, if you want to join us, if you want to ask questions of us at any time about anything, we will answer them. You can contact us at Hours, that's HOURS, at sweetteashakespeare.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we will be glad to incorporate your feedback on the show. Hooray.
Hooray indeed.
Everybody, have a good week. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.